Yes, I'm finally making this video. Totally not because of Bushiroad announcing Empousa being a tournament entry prize for the English side. Totally not because of that. This video is sponsored by Phoenix Pharaoh Cards. If you need supplies of singles or splits for Cardfight Vanguard, especially the ones in the video, do check out Phoenix Pharaoh Cards today, and as a bonus, use the promo code MetaNerd to get an amazing 5% discount. And with that being said, let's get on with the video. Greetings YouTube, welcome back to the MetaNerd channel. I am Marcus, bringing you another video for Cardfight Vanguard Willdress. In this video, we'll be going through my deck profile for one of the most expensive Dark States deck that you can make in Cardfight Vanguard Willdress. This deck is really not cheap. This deck is just crazy expensive. I mean, if you don't go to the high rarity, then yeah, maybe it's okay. But yeah, this deck is really expensive. Even 4 Brainwash Swallowers is gonna kill you already. Without further ado, let's take a look at what I am running for Drajeweled Masques. So Drajeweled Masques is not necessarily like a very flexible deck. A lot of Drajewel lists for the JP side, even for, I think for the English side, you will tend to notice that there's not a lot of room for you to actually run the deck, because due to how many pieces you need to run inside this deck. You need to run the Drajeweled Masques, you need to run the OG Drajewel, you need to run the mass order, and of course you need to run like some of the stapler cards. So you don't technically have space to even run other stuff like maybe 2 off, or you know, 3 off, or 2 offs, or 1 offs. No, you don't really have a lot of space, and it's one of the more tight space deck that you can have inside a Dark States deck. And considering that this deck do soul charges quite a bit, it's not reasonable for you to actually run like your tech stuff. So this list right here is basically like the typical list that you might see running out there. There's really nothing much you can change from this, with the exception of 1 or 2 pieces where I will mention down the video. But as a general rule, you don't really have a lot of space to run this. I mean, I keep repeating that you don't really have a lot of space. One of you guys might just make a very crazy deck list that basically could run like 2 of something very stupid like that. But from my testing, no, this deck isn't really that friendly in terms of deck building. Let's break this deck down to the needy and greedy, and hopefully you guys may understand why this deck is how it is. This deck, although it's crazy, but it does require you to have a lot of practice time with it to be effective. For the triggers, of course, we're gonna run the 8 critical lineup, because you know, criticals is just disgusting in this deck, especially when you are lowering the opponent's power to 1. Maxing the critical triggers will, of course, push your effectiveness of your restanding rearguards to be very disgusting. Draw triggers is still neat, although you do draw a lot, but this deck do requires you to have like certain pieces in your hand, because if you don't run draw triggers and you run front triggers, chances are you don't have a lot of hand size at this point. Yes, Drajewel do have like the draw engine, but I don't think it's enough, because once the opponent start rushing you, you're basically dead. Front triggers are not really that recommended. They are really useful in very niche situation. For example, like your opponent is at 5 damage and you just get a front trigger, your rearguards are just gonna hit really hard, but that is very niche. For the over trigger, as you guys have seen from the overall deck list, it's going to be Walnut here. For you to be able to squeeze out 1 attack on a opponent's 1 Vanguard, 1 powered Vanguard, is just insane. It just speaks volumes. However, Eidos Pharaoh, the blue OT, is actually not too bad, considering the fact that this OT is essentially your 9th critical trigger. I mean, sure, the Dark States OT is also like a 9 critical triggers, but this OT here is actually flexible. It's not the Vanguard getting the critical. You can give anything that attacks the critical, which makes this technically like a over critical trigger, something of that sort. The added benefit here is that you're able to recycle whatever is in your drop, which is definitely going to be nice. Be it a PG or Personal Ride or a Restander, the next turn is definitely going to be very nice. Overall, I don't think there's a right or wrong situation in terms of whether you should run Walnut or Eidos Pharaoh. Both of these do have offensive capabilities. It's just basically what your preference are. There's no right or wrong. Both of these does significantly great at their own thing. For me personally, I prefer the raid OT because if you want to check an OT, you might as well go for a more offensive one. For Rideline, I guess there's really nothing much to run other than, you know, the Drajeweled Rideline. This is still going to be the best Rideline for Drajeweled because not only does the whole Rideline actually lets you soul charge, you do have like that one turn of offensive poking because Jewel Core does Superior Call from the soul whenever you ride Jewel New, which is an 18k attacker and thus goes to soul, which is definitely going to be nice. In most cases, I would just call the Jewel Core to the front row because there's really no reason for you to have like a 13k booster to the Vanguard. It's okay, it's very nice since you are able to soul charge one, but this soul charge isn't really that critical, I would say. You just have more resources to pay for other skills. Regular Drajeweled is regular Drajeweled. I mean, he's good for you to soul charge and get the draw. Although the draw is very RNG, you don't necessarily will get the draw every single time. But having the soul charge too, I think it's really good. The deck actually is very aggressive. You can't just call down like your great ones to just rush the opponent. And since you have like, you know, a 13k attacker upon riding into Jewel New, yeah, it's just speak volumes as to how aggressive this deck is. And since you will be able to replenish your hand very effectively once you reach grade 3 and you start, you know, riding into the mass and then use Gunnaram skill to keep drawing, yeah, you will tend to notice that the hand actually gets bigger as you reach to grade 3. But getting to the grade 3 turn is where the problem lies. If you are going aggressive, start rushing your opponent down, your opponent could actually just target your front row and not giving you any counterblast, which will severely weaken your first grade 3 turn. Yeah, you do need to be very careful in terms of counterblast denial because this deck is very counterblast hungry. Every single skill in this deck costs 1 counterblast. Drajeweled Masques costs 1 counterblast, the Restander costs 1 counterblast, including the OG Drajeweled, that's 3 counterblasts. If you are rushing this hard at the start of the game, I don't think you will have 3 counterblasts, or 2 for that matter. But then again, that actually comes down to how much experience you have with this deck. Usually I would just rush and then just decide whether or not should I use that 1 counterblast on the OG Drajewel. You will need to practice a lot with this deck. Only then you're able to pilot it very, very well. I'm sure you will get amazing results with this deck. For the grade 1, we have Brainwash Sweller at 4 as well as Steam Bather Gunnaram at 3. I mean, before you even stop watching, yes, 4 Brainwash is technically a must because Brainwash is just Brainwash and Gunnaram is your draw engine. Both Brainwash and Gunnaram functions as your soul resources because on place they soul charge 1. As you keep calling Brainwash Sweller or Gunnaram, you're able to keep soul charging, which not only powers up Brainwash Sweller, you also fuel Gunnaram's skill, which is definitely going to be very, very nice. And what's more, the mass order does goes to soul after you ride into the mass, which will technically lets you have 2 grade 3s in the soul. You can always soul blast those grade 3s out or any extra grades that you don't really need in the soul to just draw 1. Gunnaram is really, really good in terms of how you use your resources. Your OG Drajewel will need to be banished from the game anyway. You might as well just soul blast it out for Gunnaram skill and then you just banish it from the drop zone. Knowing how to use your resources is the name of the game in this deck. Brainwash is Brainwash. He basically helps your column numbers. Everything and anything this guy is boosting or attacking himself is gonna be really huge. Depends on how much you soul charges because there's not really a lot of cards that soul charges in this deck. The only cards that actually soul charge is himself, Gunnaram, as well as OG Drajewel. That's it. Not many cards soul charges in this deck, which actually is a good thing rather than a bad thing, I would say. Most of the time, these 2 cards will just be an participation award 8k booster, I would say. They could become an attacker in case of like real emergency. There's a lot of times where I push Brainwash Sweller as well as Gunnaram to the front row to attack. And one last thing is that if you only want to run like one of these, there's actually another card that you can run, which is Sargon here. Sargon allows you to recycle your whatever is in your drop zone back to the soul, which will then help to not only fuel Drajeweled Masques skill, you're able to fuel Gunnaram skill. And with Sargon giving the on-hit skill to whatever that is restanding, yeah, you have 2 chances of you putting whatever is in the drop zone to the soul. Definitely a nice card to be run and should be an option, but I find that it's not really that helpful. Having the option to actually increase in power from Brainwash is actually very, very nice in my opinion. But feel free to run Sargon. She's a very good card. Next Next, of course, is you know what this guy does. He's basically the poster boy, or rather, the main shock factor. Rockarwho is basically your main attacker and restander. People find this card very annoying whenever you call him out. He's just very annoying. He's going to be a 20k to a 30k attacker, provided if you have 4 different grades. If you don't have 4 different grades, then of course, he's just going to be a 10k attacker, which is not that great. But that scenario will not happen thanks to Drajeweled Masques actually helps you fulfill 4 different grades in the soul. This card can attack without boosted, especially if you have Brainwash at the back. You don't necessarily have to boost it because he's at 30k. Usually the opponent will throw down cards to guard the first 2 attacks because they are the smaller one, and even if they get a damage trigger, it's not gonna matter because Drajeweled Masques actually lowered down to 1. So even if they get a damage OT before Drajeweld attacks, it's not gonna matter. This card can be recycled with Empousa, which is like one of the core heart and soul of this deck. Yeah, I mean, these 2 cards are basically almost the same, but Empousa do recycle stuff, which is definitely going to be very nice. After you ride into Drajeweled Masques, you have to keep in mind on your Counterblast usage, because every turn after that, you're gonna use at least 2 Counterblasts to effectively attack 5 times, that is. What you usually want to aim is that you will want to have 1 Rockarwho in the front row and 1 Empousa in the front row. That way you lower the overall Counterblast usage to 2. But yeah, that's basically it for the main attacker for this deck. I mean, every single person on the planet knows what he does. It's basically self-explanatory. Next is, of course, Empousa, the PR that basically saves Drajeweld and is literally insane for Drajeweld as well. Her main role is basically just to be a main attacker, restander, as well as piece recycler. The only downside of this card as opposed to Rockarwho is that this card is she doesn't really gain power. That's basically the downside. You will usually need a booster to boost her for her to even hit the opponent. The thing that makes this card better than Rockarwho is that she is not restricted to opponent being at grade 3. Both skills of Rockarwho is restricted to the opponent need to be at grade 3. So that's basically the main trade-off that you need to work around. What this also means is that you are able to make a 4 attack when you go first with Drajeweled Masques. Having a 4th attack while going first and at the same time retire your having board control as well as the crit in the center column is something really scary. Drajeweled Masques can start bursting like no tomorrow the moment they reach grade 3. It's just really stupid. The cards that you mainly want to recycle is basically Drajeweled Masques as well as Rockarwho or herself. There's really no point for you to keep Empousa on the field because she's just gonna get retired anyway. You might as well just retire herself and get 1 copy of herself from the soul to the hand. There's really no loss here. But of course, it still depends on how your hand looks like. You could recycle another Masque from the soul to personal ride the next turn, or you can just get another Rockarwho provided if you have Counterblast the next turn. So yeah, she's a very good recycle engine. Next is of course the both of your boss unit, Drajeweled Masques as well as the OG Drajewel. They are your boss unit, and once again, since this is a mask deck, if you draw into the OG Drajewel, most of the time you will just want to discard it away. Unless of course you don't draw into the Drajeweled Masques, then yeah, you can just keep it in your hand to personal ride the next turn. But usually I would just discard it because the mass order could search the top deck for Drajeweled Masques. Any extra grades in the soul can be spent on Gunnaram skill because of course the OG Drajewel do soul charge 2, which is definitely going to be nice. Any extra grades that you are soul charging or be put from the drop zone to the soul thanks to Drajeweled Masques skill is able to soul blast out for Gunnaram skill to draw 1, which is definitely going to be nice. Some planning will be needed for you to actually plan ahead and have a very effective turn, not only on the offense side but on the defensive side as well. At least 1 Counterblast is required for you to ride into the mass form if you are going first, because once again Drajeweled Masques costs 1 Counterblast. So if you use that 1 Counterblast on OG Drajewel, it means that Drajeweled Masques can no longer use, provided if you only have 1 Counterblast, which does happen quite a bit. You could consider rewriting back into the OG Drajewel if you do not have any Counterblast, but keep in mind here is that if you rewrite back into the OG Drajewel, it means that your overall column is gonna hit for very funny numbers. So it's sad, but it's just the way how this deck works. Lastly, of course, is the Masque of Hydragrum at 4 copies. I mean, since I am not running any Dragon Tree, the grade 1 or the grade 2, this mass order at 4 I think is pretty self-explanatory. Once again, you do not have a lot of space to even run anything at this point due to how many stuff that you are basically squeezing into this deck. The mass order, he's basically required in any deck that is a mass and can be discarded to ride if you, of course, you have like more than one copy in your hand. And usually you will only need one copy of the mass in the drop zone for you to actually mass ride into the Drajeweled Masques. Any extra copy in the hand can still be kept in the hand if you want to fish out for Drajeweled Masques. So yeah, that's basically what this card does. Usually you will have multiple copies in the soul, and because you do soul charge quite a bit, they could basically be used with Gunnaram's skill. There's literally no reason for this card to be in the soul other than being a grade 3, which is very, very nice. And that is all for this video. Do let me know down in the comment section on how will you run your Drajewel. I think most of you guys will be running like not really too far from this list. It's basically the standard on how to run. It's basically how you tweak the ratios. Feel free to let me know how you guys will run and what do you think of this deck profile. I think this is the best version of the deck can be at this point because there's really no space. Once again, do like and subscribe if you like this video, and of course during the bell notification icon so that you don't miss a video I upload. With that being said, I'll see you all on the field.
Even when you feel low, you can still go. Even when you feel slow, you can still go. Even when there's no hope, you can still go. I never answer to no, man, I still go. Go, go.